A struggling, single dad handed his baby to a stranger. Just for a minute. But what she whispered afterward changed everything. This story isn't just about survival. It's about how a single act of kindness can become the miracle you never expected. Single dad handed a stranger his baby to help an injured man. She whispered, "Can I be her mom?" The winter wind whipped down 4th Street, slicing through the cracks in Logan McRae's threadbare coat like a blade. His boots, cheap ones bought second-hand, squeaked across the salted pavement as he balanced a heat-insulated pizza bag on one arm and his 3-year-old daughter Hazel in the other. She was asleep against his shoulder cheeks, flushed pink from the cold thumb still curled by her mouth. Her coat was 2 sizes too big. Logan's hat, tugged over her tiny head, slid down to her eyebrows. He was late. Again. Traffic was backed up across the intersection and his phone buzzed with yet another impatient text from a customer. He ignored it. Between working 3 part-time jobs, fighting a custody case, and caring for Hazel on his own since Holly died, texts could wait. Life couldn't. He muttered an apology under his breath and picked up his pace eyes fixed on the address ahead, 842 W 4th Street, apartment 302. No elevator, of course. Then he heard it a loud thud. Not a crash, not metal on metal. More like the sickening sound of a body hitting pavement. He spun around. A man, gray-haired, maybe 70, lay crumpled on the crosswalk. His groceries scattered like confetti. Cars honked, but no one moved. Logan didn't hesitate. He turned to the woman standing nearby. She was tall, maybe mid-30s, wrapped in a gray wool coat that screamed money. Dark eyes. Striking. But what mattered was that she wasn't on her phone or looking away. He stepped toward her, urgent. "Can you hold her?" The woman blinked. "My daughter," he said already, transferring Hazel into her arms. "Please, just don't move." Without waiting for an answer, Logan sprinted into the intersection. The man was breathing, but barely. His face was scraped, lips cracked. Logan knelt, shielding him with his body as cars slowed and phones came out. He barked instructions. "Someone, call 911. Don't just stand there." The woman, he barely registered her now, had backed up with Hazel, holding the child close. Hazel stirred, blinked, and finding herself in strange arms, began to cry. Elena Halberg tightened her hold gently and rocked side to side. She whispered something no one could hear, but Hazel soon calmed. By the time the ambulance arrived, Logan was kneeling beside the old man, coat wrapped around him. His own fingers were turning red from the cold. A paramedic took over. "You the one who called this in?" No, Logan said, just saw it happen. "You're freezing," the man said. "You should get checked out too." "I've got a delivery," Logan muttered, half smiling, rising to his feet. He turned, searching. The woman was still there. Hazel was back in her arm's thumb now planted securely in her mouth, sleepy again. Logan exhaled, stepping toward them. "Thanks, I didn't mean to just—" "You did the right thing," the woman said, voice low and warm. He reached for Hazel. The toddler looked between them as if sensing something unspoken. Then, without a fuss, she reached for her father. Logan tucked her into the crook of his arm. "We should get going." The woman nodded. "Be safe." He hesitated, then offered a small smile. "You too?" She didn't smile back, but she watched him walk away. 5 minutes later, Logan climbed the last of the 3 flights of stairs, panting, Hazel still in his arms, pizza bag slung like a shield on his back. He knocked. The door opened. A young guy in sweatpants looked annoyed. "You're late," traffic, Logan said. He handed over the box and forced a smile. The guy muttered something, tipped $2 and shut the door. Logan stared at the closed door for a beat. Then he turned, trudging back down heart-hammering for more than exertion. Back in his old sedan, he settled Hazel into her car seat. She was half awake, humming something tuneless. He reached to brush her curls from her face and froze. There pinned to her sleeve was a business card. Heavy cardstock. No name. Just a gold-embossed logo, Halberg and Associates. He turned it over. nothing on the back. Weird. Logan pulled into traffic, his eyes darting to the card again and again. He couldn't shake the image of the woman, her calm, steady hands, the way Hazel melted into her. And her eyes. Not just beautiful, haunted. He tried to push it aside. He had more pressing problems, past due bills, a court date in 2 weeks, and no backup plan if he lost custody. He needed to pick up another shift, buy cold medicine, fix the heat in the apartment. But as he drove through the darkening streets, his daughter murmured from the back seat, still half asleep, "Daddy." Pretty lady, smelled like Mama. The car swerved slightly before he corrected. Logan gripped the wheel tighter and kept driving, trying not to let the ache behind his ribs grow any deeper. He didn't have time for memories, or mysteries, or the kind of women who wore $1,000 coats and left behind ghostly business cards. But somewhere deep in the back of his mind, something shifted, and the woman in gray didn't leave. Logan stood at the sink, sleeves rolled up past his elbows, washing the last of the dinner plates beneath a stream of lukewarm water. The faucet made a wheezing sound when he turned it off, as if even the plumbing was tired of holding on. Hazel sat on the floor behind him in a mountain of worn stuffed animals and thrift store books, humming softly as she flipped through a board book with missing pages. The apartment was small, just one bedroom they shared, a galley kitchen, a living room that doubled as their play area, and often Logan's bed. Outside, wind pressed against the windows like a warning. He dried his hands and walked over to her. Bath or story first? Hazel didn't look up. Story. He smiled, pulling her into his lap. You always say that. She tilted her head back, the blue light from the TV reflecting in her wide eyes. It's my favorite. Logan reached for a book, Goodnight Moon, frayed and water-stained, and began to read, his voice low, steady, warm. Hazel leaned against his chest and by the 3rd page had fallen asleep. He carried her to the bedroom, laid her on the mattress, and tucked a blanket around her. He lingered, brushing a curl away from her cheek. You're all I've got, baby girl, he whispered, and I'm going to fight like hell to keep it that way. At 10:00 p.m., Logan opened the email that had been sitting in his inbox all day, the one from Lynette Hawkins, the attorney representing his late wife's sister, Tamara. He'd been dreading it. Subject: custody hearing update. McRae vs. Hamilton, Mr. McRae. Please be advised the Hamiltons have filed an urgent motion questioning your financial stability and residential suitability for raising a minor. A social worker will conduct an unannounced home inspection within the next 10 days. Logan leaned back in the creaky kitchen chair, rubbed his temples, and exhaled through clenched teeth. He had no family left. Holly's parents were long gone, and Tamara, who hadn't spoken to them in years, was now claiming Logan was endangering Hazel's future by keeping her in poverty. The irony, she lived 3 states away and had never even met Hazel. But in the eyes of the court, Logan's 3 part-time jobs didn't scream stability. His apartment didn't meet full child welfare standards. He didn't have a savings account. What he did have was love, limitless, ferocious, and unwavering, but love alone didn't sway judges. He pulled out the folder he kept in a kitchen drawer, paperwork for Hazel's birth certificate, pediatric records, proof of employment, old tax returns. He'd been trying to save enough for a real attorney, but every extra dollar went to medicine rent or Hazel's boots last month. There was a knock at the door. He tensed, glanced at the clock, too late for visitors. Opening it cautiously, he found Mrs. Conway, the elderly widow from 3B, standing with her hands wrapped around a casserole dish. I made extra chicken pot pie, she said. You've been looking skinnier than your paycheck lately. Logan gave a tired chuckle and stepped aside. You didn't have to do that. I know. That's why I did. She set the dish down and surveyed the room, eyes softening at the sight of Hazel's toys, the taped-up windows, and the pile of laundry near the radiator. You need anything, you just ask, she said. I'm managing. I didn't say you weren't, but sometimes even strong folks need a minute to breathe. Logan offered a nod. He couldn't afford pride anymore, but he hadn't figured out how to let go of it either. Before she left, Mrs. Conway turned to him. "You're a good father, Logan. I see it. Others will too." After she was gone, he sat at the table staring at the paperwork again. He felt like he was drowning chest-tight with pressure. No matter how hard he swam, the tide always pulled harder. He stood up abruptly and paced. This wasn't sustainable. He couldn't lose Hazel. He needed a stable job, something with benefits, something permanent. Maybe that meant moving. Maybe that meant swallowing his pride and accepting help. His gaze drifted to the gold business card lying on the counter. Halberg and Associates. No phone number, no title, no address. Just a name. And a mystery. He didn't know why he hadn't thrown it away. Maybe because the woman who'd held his daughter that day had looked at Hazel like she mattered. Not like a stranger's child. Like a child, period. Hazel stirred and cried out softly from the bedroom. Logan moved to comfort her kneeling by the mattress. Her small hand gripped his finger in her sleep. "I'm not giving up," he murmured. "I don't care if I have to crawl through fire, I'll find a way." By morning, the world was coated in a thin sheet of ice. Logan bundled Hazel up and strapped her into the car seat in his old rust-bitten sedan. The engine groaned but started. They made it halfway down the block before the heater coughed and died. At the first stoplight, Hazel looked at him through the rearview mirror and said, "Daddy?" "Yeah, sweetheart. Will we always be together?" His chest tightened. He reached back blindly and squeezed her little booted foot. Always kiddo, no matter what. But even as he said it, a part of him whispered that always could mean anything. Always could end at a courtroom door. Always was fragile when held up against a world that didn't care how much you loved your child, only whether you could afford to prove it. And Logan. He was running out of proof. Fast. The bell above the gas station convenience store gave a half-hearted ding as Logan stepped inside, shaking the cold from his coat. Hazel, wrapped like a burrito in her oversized pink parka, rode on his hip with sleepy eyes and cheeks flushed from windburn. He gave a polite nod to the teen at the register, then made his way toward the back cooler, grabbing a gallon of milk and a small carton of eggs. He hesitated, debating over a bundle of overpriced bananas. Hazel tugged his collar. "Can we get peanut butter?" Daddy Logan crouched to her level, brushing her hair aside. "We've got just enough for these." "Next time? Okay." She nodded, disappointed but used to it. That was the part that hurt. They made their way to the register. He counted quarters and ones from a jar in his coat pocket as backup gas money while the teenager watched with the practiced boredom of someone used to seeing struggle walk through the door. $6.52, the kid mumbled. Logan slid the coins across the counter, gave a tired thank you, and turned, and froze. She was standing near the entrance. The woman from that day. Gray coat. Same calm, poised expression. Like someone who belonged in a glass office with skyline views, not a gas station off Interstate 71. Elena. She was browsing the magazine rack, a bottle of water in one hand, a manila envelope in the other. For a moment, she didn't see him. Then she looked up and her expression didn't shift. Not surprise, not recognition, only quiet observation. Hazel squealed. Pretty Lady Logan flushed. Hazel? But Elena smiled now just slightly and stepped toward them. Hi again. Logan adjusted Hazel in his arms. Didn't expect to see you here. I was just passing through, she said simply. Needed gas, and a moment to breathe. He nodded. The silence that fell between them wasn't awkward, exactly, just unexpected. He started to move toward the exit, but she held up a hand. I saw the footage, she said quietly. Of you, saving that man. Logan stopped cold. What footage? Her gaze was unreadable. Someone filmed it. It was circulating in a few forums, human interest circles. You had no idea. I don't follow much online, he muttered. She hesitated. You're a good man, Mr. McRae? His shoulders stiffened. You don't know me. I know what I saw. Yeah, he said a little sharper than intended. You saw 30 seconds. You didn't see the rest, the bills, the nights without heat, the part where the court thinks I'm too poor to raise my own daughter. Elena didn't flinch. No, I didn't, but I'd like to. Logan blinked. Why? She stepped forward and crouched slightly to Hazel's level. Because when someone trusts you with what matters most to them, even for a moment, it's not something you forget. Hazel smiled and reached out to her. Logan exhaled tension leaking from his frame. Do you want to sit? There's a bench outside. I've got 10 minutes before I have to be back on the road. Outside, the wind was crisp but calmer. They sat on the bench near the air pump station, Logan holding Hazel close. Elena sitting with hands folded over the manila envelope. You didn't answer my question, Logan said after a while. Which one? Why you're here. Really? She turned to him. I'm part of a foundation. We invest in small projects, local resilience programs, community outreach. I travel a lot to meet the people we might help. He narrowed his eyes. So, I'm a charity case now. No, she said gently. You're a person I noticed, because you did something no one else did. You acted when others froze, and you trusted a stranger with the most important thing in your world. Her words struck him like a drumbeat, echoing louder than he wanted to admit. What do you want from me? He asked finally. Nothing, she said. I'm just following up. With what she opened the envelope. Inside was a simple folder labeled Community Trades Initiative Pilot Candidates. She handed him a brochure. We're launching a new training program, hands-on mechanical and technical instruction. Paid apprenticeship childcare coverage included. It's part of a national project we're piloting here in Ohio. Logan stared at the page. I'm not a student, he said. You're not just a delivery guy either, she replied. You used to be an engineer, didn't you? He looked at her sharply. How do you know that? She hesitated. I looked you up. After the video. His jaw tightened. So, you've been researching me. I've been curious, she said carefully. Not judging, just trying to understand. He looked back down at the paper. The idea of a future that didn't involve scraping quarters for bananas felt surreal. But real people didn't just hand out lifelines like this, not without expecting something. I don't have a resume, he said. You don't need one. You've got grit, integrity. The rest we can build. He looked at Hazel, her eyelids drooping against his chest. He looked at the street, the sun starting to break through the clouds. And then back at Elena. There was still something about her that didn't add up. She was too composed, too carefully distant. But in her eyes was a kind of sorrow he understood. He took the folder slowly, like it might vanish if he moved too quickly. I'll think about it, he said. That's all I'm asking. They stood. Elena offered Hazel a gentle wave. Hazel smiled. Will we see the pretty lady again? Elena crouched her voice barely above a whisper. I hope so. Logan watched her walk away, stepping into a sleek black SUV parked near the curb. No driver, no entourage. Just her, a woman in gray vanishing as quickly as she'd come. As he buckled Hazel into the back seat, Logan glanced at the folder again. He didn't trust Easy anymore, but something about that moment felt different. Not like a handout, more like a door, one he hadn't realized was even there. And maybe, just maybe, he was ready to knock, was ready to. The courtroom smelled faintly of lemon polish and cold bureaucracy. Logan sat rigid in his folding chair, dressed in his one clean button-up shirt and a blazer borrowed from Mrs. Conway's late husband. The sleeves were too long. The collar itched, but at least it looked like effort, respectability. Across the aisle sat Tamara Hamilton, his late wife's sister, her posture straight as a ruler, arms folded neatly across a designer coat lips, pinched in polite disdain. Her husband, Derek, leaned toward her to whisper something, and she nodded without ever looking at Logan. Hazel wasn't there, thank God. Logan had left her with Mrs. Conway for the morning, promising he'd be back before lunch, He didn't want Hazel to see this. The bailiff called the room to order. Judge Marilyn Faulkner, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s with clipped silver hair and sharp eyes, entered briskly and sat. The custody hearing began. Tamara's attorney stood first. She painted Logan's life with broad, harsh strokes. Multiple part-time jobs with no benefits. Substandard housing. A lack of stable support system. A recent incident where the child was seen unattended in a public intersection. Logan's chest clenched. The video. She submitted the footage to the court, a phone-recorded clip grainy and shaky showing Logan rushing toward a collapsed man while Hazel remained off-frame. From this angle, it looked damning. Logan's court-appointed attorney tried to object but was overruled. Then Tamara took the stand. She delivered her testimony with mechanical precision. She didn't hate Logan, she said. She simply believed Hazel deserved more stability, more structure, more safety. Her home in Virginia had a fenced yard, a private preschool nearby, and a nanny. She referred to Hazel as the child, never by name. When it was his turn, Logan stood slowly. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice was clear. "I may not have a backyard," he said, "or a trust fund, or polished floors, but I have something Tamara doesn't: every scraped knee, every bedtime story, every nightmare she wakes up from. I'm there. I know what makes her laugh. I know the way she hums when she colors. I know my daughter." He looked toward the judge. "And yes, I work 3 jobs. Yes, we live small. But I've never let her go to bed hungry. I've never missed a day holding her when she needed me. Isn't that what being a parent is?" Judge Faulkner gave no indication she'd been moved. Her face was a practiced mask. "We'll take a short recess," she said. Logan stepped into the hallway, lungs tight, throat dry. He sat on the wooden bench and buried his face in his hands. He was losing. He could feel it. Every moment of sacrifice, every sleepless night, every dollar stretched beyond reason, it might not be enough. Not here. Not in this world of paperwork and technicalities. He heard footsteps. Looking up, he saw a young woman from the court clerk's office walking toward the judge's chambers with a thick envelope in her hands. Behind her, another woman trailed tall, dark coat striking presence. Elena. Logan stood abruptly. She met his eyes but gave no reaction, only a small nod, calm, reserved, like nothing in the world could shake her. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. Then the courtroom was called back to order. Judge Faulkner adjusted her glasses and cleared her throat. "Before this court rules, we've reviewed additional evidence submitted during recess. Namely, security footage retrieved from a traffic camera located on the intersection of 4th and Broad." Logan's heart stuttered. The judge continued. "The video clearly shows the respondent, Mr. McRae, placing the child into the care of a bystander before approaching the injured party. The bystander is identified as an adult female who remains present and protective of the child during the entire incident. At no point is the child left unattended." Tamara's attorney tried to protest. "Your Honor, we were not made aware of this footage. Neither was this court, Judge Faulkner snapped. But the evidence is clear, and damning to the petitioner's claim." She folded her hands. "This court finds no credible threat to the child's well-being in her current home environment. While financial hardship is noted, there is no evidence of neglect, abuse, or irresponsibility." A pause. "Custody will remain with the child's father, Mr. Logan McRae." Logan's knees buckled slightly. Tamara let out a sharp breath and rose from her chair, lips pursed, her husband already pulling her toward the exit. Logan sat down slowly. He didn't even realize his hands were shaking until the court officer placed the released custody documents in them. He blinked at the seal. It was real. Hazel was staying with him. He walked out into the parking lot like a man surfacing from deep water, heart hammering with disbelief. The cold hit him hard, but he didn't care. Elena stood by the curb. She didn't wave, didn't smile, but she waited. He approached her slowly. "It was you." She met his gaze. It wasn't difficult. The footage was there. No one had thought to look. You did. I had to, she said simply. The court needed the truth. So did you. He nodded, struggling to find words. I don't know what to say. You don't owe me anything, Logan. He paused. Why are you doing this? Elena hesitated. Because once someone saw me falling and did nothing. And I've regretted not having someone like you in my life ever since. Their eyes met two people standing in a December wind, each scarred in different ways, each holding on to something just out of reach. He didn't thank her. Not yet. The moment was too big for small words. But as she walked away again, fading into the background like a half-forgotten song, Logan understood something for the first time in a long while. He wasn't alone anymore, and maybe, just maybe, she wasn't either. It was past 9 when Logan finally got Hazel to sleep. Her body curled into his chest like a comma, warm and limp with trust, her breath rising and falling in small rhythmic puffs. He lay there longer than he needed to, memorizing her heartbeat, the faint smell of baby shampoo, the weight of her hand resting against his shirt. She was safe. She was his. And for the first time in months, maybe years, that truth wasn't teetering on a knife's edge. When he finally rose from the mattress and tucked her in, Logan walked back to the front door to double-check the deadbolt. That's when he noticed it. A package. Small, wrapped in brown paper, resting neatly against the doorframe. There was no label, no address, no note, only his name handwritten in clean cursive. He brought it inside cautiously and unwrapped it on the kitchen table under the dull yellow glow of the overhead light. Inside was a carefully folded child's winter coat, dark navy, warm, and lined with fleece. Brand new. It looked like it cost more than he'd made that entire day. And beneath it, nestled in the box, was a small wooden item wrapped in tissue paper. Logan peeled back the layers and uncovered a rectangular wooden music box worn around the edges but beautifully carved. He opened it. A soft melody spilled out, haunting and familiar. Inside the lid was a message burned into the wood in tiny, delicate script. To the child who deserves every story to end with a happy one. He stared at it for a long time. It was her. Elena. He didn't know how she'd gotten his address, but something in him wasn't surprised. She moved through the world like someone who could slip through walls if she needed to quiet, unseen precise. But this wasn't charity. It was something more intimate. A gesture without expectation. A whisper instead of a declaration. And that scared him more than he wanted to admit. The next morning, Hazel squealed with delight at the coat. "It has pockets!" she exclaimed, jamming both hands inside and dancing in a small circle. "Can I wear it now? It's yours," Logan said. "Go ahead." He wanted to ask her what she thought about the music box, but Hazel had already set it beside her coloring books like it belonged there. Later that day, as Logan cleaned out the kitchen drawer where he kept old paperwork and coupons, he came across something he hadn't seen in months, the last letter Holly had written him. It had come in the mail 2 weeks after she passed something she'd dropped at the hospital's outgoing box when she was recovering from the emergency C-section that nearly killed her. He hadn't had the heart to read it again. Until now. He opened the envelope with careful fingers. "Logan, if you're reading this, it means things didn't go as planned. I know you're scared. I know you're tired. And I need you to know you don't have to do this alone forever. Let someone help you when the time comes. You'll know it when you see it. Trust your gut. And please, love again. Let Hazel see what a good man looks like when he's allowed to heal. Love you always, Holly." The words cut through him like sunlight through a cracked door. He sat in silence for a long time, the letter pressed to his chest, the music box playing softly in the next room. 2 days later, Logan stood outside the community center, the folder from Elena's foundation tucked under one arm. He hadn't told anyone he was coming. Part of him was still unsure. Another part, a deeper, braver part, knew that change didn't come wrapped in certainty. It came as a challenge. A dare. Inside the center was warm and filled with people. Men and women of all ages, shapes, and colors. Everyone looked nervous. Everyone looked like they had something to prove. Logan added his name to the sign-in sheet. Mr. McRae. He turned. The woman addressing him wasn't Elena, but someone who clearly worked for her early 30s clipboard and hand-friendly smile. Hi, I'm Kendra. I manage onboarding for the Community Trades Initiative. Elena said you might come by. Logan blinked. She mentioned me. She said, look for the guy who doesn't know he's already a leader. Kendra grinned. She also said to give you this. From her folder, Kendra pulled out a handwritten note. Logan opened it slowly. Logan, showing up is the hardest part. You've already done that. Welcome to the next step. He exhaled. For the first time in so long, he felt something shift in his chest, not just relief, but momentum. Let's get you settled, Kendra said. As she led him through the center past classrooms filled with tools, workbenches, and quietly focused people, Logan realized something. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was stepping into something. A possibility. A beginning. That night, as he tucked Hazel in, she whispered sleepily, Daddy. Yeah, I like the pretty lady. He chuckled. Yeah, me too. She blinked up at him. Will she come back? I don't know, he said honestly, but I hope so. Hazel turned toward the music box and pressed play. The melody drifted into the dark room. And for the first time in years, Logan didn't dread tomorrow. He was beginning to believe. Maybe their story hadn't reached its end. Maybe it had just turned a page. The boiler hissed again. Logan stood over the open panel in his apartment hallway, a wrench in one hand and a flashlight between his teeth. The heat had been acting up for days, coming in short, uneven bursts that left the living room freezing by dawn and the bathroom practically tropical. Hazel sat nearby, wrapped in a blanket, coloring a picture of a horse that looked suspiciously like a lumpy dog. She didn't seem to mind the cold. I think he needs shoes, she said, holding up her drawing. Logan glanced over, shivering as the warm patch on his back gave way to another blast of icy air. Sweetheart, I think he needs a whole new skeleton. Hazel giggled. Suddenly there was a knock at the door. 2 sharp raps, then silence. Logan lowered the flashlight and exchanged a look with Hazel, then wiped his hands on a towel and opened the door. Elena stood there, gloved hands clutching a thermos. Her cheeks were pink from the wind, and her hair was loose, curling slightly around her collar. I brought coffee, she said, holding out the thermos like a peace offering. And a space heater if you need it. My car's full of them. Logan blinked. Are you serious? I am. She smiled a little sheepishly. We're donating extras to families through the foundation, and I thought maybe yours could use a head start. Behind him, Hazel gasped. Pretty lady Elena looked past him and gave a small wave. Hi, Hazel. I missed you. Hazel beamed, which Logan noted she rarely did with anyone except him. He hesitated only a second. You want to come in? Inside, Elena crouched next to Hazel and accepted a hand-drawn picture of a lopsided rainbow as if it were fine art. Then she moved to sit across from Logan at the tiny kitchen table, her eyes scanning the cluttered space without judgment. He poured the coffee. It smelled rich, real nothing like the instant powder he'd been drinking. They sat in silence for a moment. The music box in the living room played softly, Hazel's new obsession. It had become a part of their bedtime routine, her comfort object, her lullaby. Logan nodded toward it. Was that yours? Elena's fingers tightened slightly around her mug. Yes, my father gave it to me when I was little. It's one of the only things I kept after he died. Logan studied her. You don't talk about your family much. That's because there's not much to say, she replied quietly. Not much worth saying anyway. He waited. She glanced at Hazel, who was now humming and spinning slowly in circles. I was 17 when I found out I was pregnant, Elena said, her voice barely audible. My mother was furious, said I'd ruined everything. We were a legacy family, she said. We didn't make headlines for the wrong reasons. My father, he wasn't much better, but quieter about it. Logan didn't move. They sent me away, to a place out west, told me to have the child, then give it up and never speak of it again. She looked down. And I did. Silence wrapped around them like a storm cloud. I didn't even hold her, Elena said, eyes wet. I signed the paper, I walked out, and I never looked back. Not because I didn't want to, but because I was too scared that if I saw her, I'd never be able to let go. Logan's chest ached. What happened after I buried it, she said. Graduated, built a company, created a life where no one could ever control me again. But the hole stayed. Quiet. Deep. She exhaled slowly. Then one day I saw a man hand over his daughter to a stranger in the middle of chaos, and I couldn't stop thinking about you, or her, or the moment I gave mine away. Logan leaned back in his chair staring at her. That's why you helped me. No, she said firmly. I helped you because you deserved it. But I stayed. Because I wasn't ready to leave. Not again. Hazel ran over at that moment, her rainbow picture now folded into a paper hat. She placed it carefully on Elena's head. You're the queen, Hazel declared. Elena laughed through a throat full of tears. That's a first. Logan watched them, something stirring in him he hadn't allowed in years, something warm and dangerous and impossibly human. Do you regret it? He asked, voice low. Giving her up every single day, she said. But that pain. It taught me what matters, and I'm trying in my own flawed way to honor that now. Hazel returned to her coloring, leaving Elena and Logan in a space filled with old grief and something startlingly close to hope. You're not the only one who buried something, Logan said after a while. Elena looked up. When Holly, my wife, passed away, I shut down. I told myself Hazel would be enough. That love like that only happens once, and I was lucky to even get it once. She said nothing, waiting. But lately, he continued, eyes meeting hers. I've started wondering if maybe the heart isn't a one-shot organ. Maybe it's expandable. Elena's breath caught, and in that tiny drafty apartment with its leaky boiler and mismatched chairs, something real passed between them. Not romantic, not yet, but honest. Undeniably alive. As the sun began to set, Elena stood to leave. I've taken too much of your time, she said, reaching for her coat. Not at all. Logan replied, his voice softer now. At the door, she hesitated. You know, you're doing better than you think. He raised an eyebrow. Is that a professional opinion? She smiled. No, just a woman who sees what's real. He opened the door for her. The wind had died down. Snow flurried softly in the fading light. As she stepped outside, Hazel's voice rang out behind them. Bye, Mommy. Both adults froze. Elena turned back, her face unreadable. Logan looked at her, really looked, and saw a flicker of something so raw it made his throat tighten. She didn't mean he started. But Elena shook her head, eyes bright. No, she whispered. It's okay. Then she walked into the twilight coat fluttering behind her like the final page of a story that just maybe wasn't over yet. The storm rolled in faster than the forecast had warned. By dusk, a sharp sleet began to fall over Cincinnati, coating sidewalks in glistening frost and making the roads slick and unforgiving. Logan tightened Hazel's coat hood around her small face, securing the scarf with trembling hands. She clung to her stuffed rabbit like it held back the wind itself. He lifted her into his arms and dashed across the slushy parking lot of the walk-in clinic feet, slipping on black ice as he approached the sliding glass doors. Inside, the heat blasted his face and fogged his glasses. The receptionist looked up with practiced disinterest, then sat up straighter as she took in Hazel's flushed cheeks and Logan's anxious expression. She's burning up, he said, voice hoarse. Fever started this afternoon, then she wouldn't keep water down. She's not herself. The receptionist glanced at the screen. Do you have insurance? Logan hesitated. Just Medicaid for her. She nodded and handed him a clipboard. "Fill this out. It's a 2-hour wait." Logan stared at the form. Hazel whimpered in his arms. Her forehead radiated heat and her lips were dry. "She can't wait 2 hours." "I'm sorry," the woman said, not unkindly. "Triage nurse will evaluate her soon. We're at capacity." He sat on a worn plastic chair in the corner, bouncing Hazel, gently whispering words he didn't believe. The room buzzed with fluorescent light and quiet desperation. He counted the minutes. Watched Hazel's eyes flutter. Felt the weight of panic press into his chest. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. He checked his phone. No messages, no backup plan. He'd called every favor he had left last month. The gas tank was low. His checking account had just enough to cover cold medicine maybe, but not a private pediatrician. Hazel's head lolled to the side. Her breathing was shallow. "Please," he whispered to no one in particular. "Please don't let this be the moment I lose her." Then Logan. He looked up. Elena. She was stepping through the glass doors, hair damp from the sleet coat wrapped tightly around her frame, eyes wide with alarm. "I got your voicemail," she said, crossing to him quickly. "What happened? I didn't leave you. He stopped, checked his phone, and realized the last call he made accidentally was to her number. A misdial. Or maybe not. He swallowed hard. She's sick. I can't get anyone to see her." Elena looked down at Hazel, her face shifting into focus with a steadiness that startled him. "Come with me." "Elena, I can't afford, I didn't ask." 20 minutes later, they were in the back room of a small private clinic on the edge of downtown. Elena had driven like a woman-possessed, tires slicing through slush with surgical precision. Inside, the nurse barely took Logan's name before ushering them back. A pediatrician appeared within 5 minutes. Hazel was laid on the table, whimpering quietly. The doctor, a calm, middle-aged man with kind eyes, ran through a battery of checks. "Her fever's high," he said, "but the good news is it's viral. We'll get fluids in her. Let's cool her down and monitor for a couple of hours. She's a tough one." Logan sank into the chair beside the exam table, relief washing over him like warm rain. Elena stood near the door arms, folded, her coat still clinging with melting snow. "You didn't have to do this," he said quietly. "I know. But you did. I wasn't going to let you sit there and watch her get worse," she said. "Not when I could help." He met her eyes. "This is more than help," she exhaled. "Maybe I needed to be needed." There was a long pause. "I'm sorry," he said suddenly. "For what? For pushing you away when all you've done is care." Elena tilted her head slightly. "I'm not here for thanks. I'm here because I know what it feels like to be helpless, and I've learned that if you have the power to ease someone else's fear, you use it, no matter the cost." Logan blinked. "You talk like someone who's had to learn that the hard way." "I have." Another silence passed, this one less heavy, more mutual. The doctor returned with a blanket and a smile. "She's already improving. Should be stable enough to head home in an hour." Logan breathed in deeply, then nodded. Later that night, Logan carried Hazel, now dozing peacefully, into his apartment. Elena followed, holding the small bag of prescriptions and a container of soup. He laid Hazel on the bed, tucked her in, kissed her forehead. When he came back into the kitchen, Elena was at the stove warming the soup without asking. "You didn't have to stay," he said. "I know," she said again. "But I wanted to." They sat at the table, 2 mismatched mugs of tea between them, the silence familiar, now comforting. "Today scared me," he admitted. "I faced a lot since Holly died, but I haven't felt that helpless since the night she passed." Elena reached across the table and laid her hand over his. "You're not alone anymore, Logan." He stared at her fingers on his slim, warm, steady. "You say that like it's a promise." "It is," she said. And something inside him softened. He didn't say the words, not yet. But in his heart he began to believe them. That night, as the wind howled against the windows and the radiator clicked its uneven tune, Logan sat in the armchair beside Hazel's bed, watching her chest rise and fall. The music box played its gentle lullaby once more. And across the room, Elena sat silently, her presence not loud or overwhelming, but constant. Anchoring. The storm outside raged on. But inside that little apartment something had shifted. Not just safety, not just healing, but the quiet, tentative beginning of something neither of them had dared to hope for. A future. Sunlight spilled across the wooden floor of Logan's apartment, fractured through cheap blinds but still warm. Hazel, now fully recovered, was perched on the living room rug, building a tower out of mismatched plastic blocks, her face set in fierce concentration. Logan stood at the counter pouring coffee into 2 mugs. He added a splash of oat milk to one and left the other black. He'd learned how Elena took her coffee not because she told him, but because she always left the oat milk untouched when he offered. She was sitting by the window, elbows resting on the sill, gazing out at the thawing city below. The February chill was lifting, though it still whispered through the cracks. Outside, patches of snow clung stubbornly to the curbs like memories that refused to melt. Logan handed her the mug and sat opposite. "You didn't have to stay overnight," he said. "I know," she replied softly, her eyes still watching something distant. "But I didn't want to leave." Hazel piped up from the floor. "Daddy, look, it's a castle." He smiled. "It's beautiful, sweetheart." Elena turned and offered a proud nod. "Very royal." Hazel beamed, then resumed her architectural conquest. The silence that followed was gentle, but not empty. It was the silence of familiarity, not yet intimacy, but something heading there. Something real. Elena took a slow sip, then placed the mug down. "There's something I've been meaning to ask you." Logan straightened slightly. "Okay." She reached into her bag and pulled out a slim folder different from the last. This one was labeled with his name in small printed type. "I want to offer you something," she said, "but I need you to hear me out before you say no." He raised an eyebrow but nodded. "We've just launched a transitional program for candidates in our trades initiative. It's more than training. It includes salaried placement health benefits, child care coverage, and eventual ownership track for independent contracting." Logan's mouth went dry. "That sounds like it's for someone more qualified." Elena opened the folder. Inside was a packet with typed evaluations, handwritten notes, and a photograph of him from a training session 2 weeks ago. Sleeves, rolled up hands demonstrating how to realign a water heater component. He didn't know someone had been watching. "I sat in on your workshop," she said. "You don't just fix things. You teach people how to believe they can fix them too. That's leadership. And we need people like you." He stared at the photo. It didn't feel like him. It looked like someone together, capable, like someone who hadn't been on the edge of losing everything 3 weeks earlier. "I don't want a handout," he said quietly. "This isn't a handout, Logan. It's an investment. And not just from me, from people who believe in what you've shown. I'm just the one who had the privilege of noticing first." He shook his head, swallowing hard. "I'm not used to people believing in me. Maybe it's time you get used to it." Hazel's voice chimed in again, pulling him from the edge of his thoughts. "Daddy, I made a garden on the roof." He looked at her tower. Somehow she'd constructed a layer of green Legos across the top. He chuckled softly. "Of course you did." Elena watched the exchange with a quiet warmth in her eyes. Then she leaned forward, voice lower, now more personal. "I know what it's like to be offered something you think you don't deserve," she said. "I know what it's like to believe that if you accept help, it means you're weak. But the truth is, sometimes accepting help is the bravest thing we do." He looked at her then, not just her words, but her. The layers beneath her calm, her poise, her strength. She wasn't just giving him a job. She was handing him trust, a kind of faith he hadn't felt from anyone since Holly died. He reached for the folder again. Is there a deadline? End of the month, she said. But spots are filling fast, and you'd be doing more than just work. You'd be shaping the next wave of apprentices. You'd have a voice, a future. He sat back in his chair, trying to breathe around the knot in his throat. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about rebuilding something he didn't even know had collapsed his sense of worth. I'll think about it, he said finally. I know, she replied. And whatever you decide, it's yours to choose. No pressure. They sat for a while longer, sipping coffee and watching Hazel build an empire of colored blocks and innocence. That afternoon, Elena gathered her coat and bag. Hazel wrapped herself around her legs. Will you come back tomorrow? Elena smiled, crouching down. Maybe not tomorrow, but soon. Hazel pouted. Can you stay forever? Elena's eyes flicked up to Logan. For a second, her gaze faltered. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was soft. Wouldn't that be something? Hazel returned to her blocks. Logan walked Elena to the door. He hesitated. I meant what I said. I'll think about it. I know, she said again. Then she looked at him with something deeper than gratitude. Just know. Sometimes when the storm clears, what's left behind isn't ruin. It's space. For something new. She left, and Logan stood there watching the hallway long after she'd disappeared. He glanced at the folder again, then at Hazel still humming to herself on the floor crown of Legos atop her head. Maybe the storm hadn't broken him. Maybe it had broken open something far more important. And maybe, just maybe, he was finally ready to step into the light. The invitation arrived in an envelope far too elegant for Logan's mailbox. Thick cardstock, cream-colored with embossed gold lettering that shimmered under the apartment's flickering kitchen light. At first glance, he assumed it was a mistake, something meant for the law office down the hall, or one of the newer tenants upstairs who drove luxury cars and didn't make eye contact. But there it was, Mr. Logan McRae printed in bold serif font across the top. Inside, the card read, You are cordially invited to attend the annual Hope and Home Foundation Gala celebrating leaders of quiet impact. March 15th, 7 p.m. The Granville Ballroom, downtown Cincinnati. Formal attire requested. Childcare provided on site. Your presence is more than welcomed. It is earned. There was no signature, just the seal of the foundation. He turned the card over and over in his hand, waiting for it to vanish like a dream. But it stayed real, tactile, unbelievable. Logan stood in front of the mirror 3 nights later in a charcoal gray suit. Mrs. Conway had altered herself, muttering something about broad shoulders and poor stitching. Hazel clapped from the couch. You look like a prince daddy. He smoothed the lapel. A very nervous prince. Hazel wore her best dress, one Elena had brought last week just in case. Pale yellow with tiny embroidered daisies and a matching bow. Logan hadn't asked where she bought it. He didn't want to know how much it cost. He bundled her into the car and made the drive downtown in silence, heart pounding. He wasn't sure why he was going. Curiosity. Obligation. Some vague need to prove to himself, to her, to the universe that he belonged in more than just the margins. Maybe it was all of those things. The Granville Ballroom was carved out of glass and steel, lit from the inside like a lantern. The valet didn't blink twice when Logan handed him the keys to his rust-spotted sedan. Inside, a woman in black sequins greeted them at a check-in table, eyes lighting up when she saw Hazel. You must be Mr. McRae, she said warmly. We've been expecting you. Hazel was led to a room down the hall filled with other children and a rainbow of art supplies. Logan knelt and kissed her forehead. You'll be okay. She nodded. You're just in the other room, right. He straightened, took a breath, and followed the music. The ballroom was stunning. Chandeliers floated like constellations. Tables dressed in white linen surrounded a stage with soft gold lighting. Waiters glided between guests like shadows, and the hum of polite conversation buzzed beneath the music from a live-string quartet. Logan lingered near the back, feeling like a stain on silk. Then he saw her. Elena stood at the center of it all, speaking to a small cluster of donors and board members. She wore a deep navy gown that shimmered like the night sky. Her hair was swept up a few tendrils framing her face. She looked composed, radiant, untouchable. He almost turned around, but then her eyes found him, and everything softened. She excused herself and walked straight toward him, heels clicking like punctuation marks. When she reached him, she didn't say hello. She didn't ask how he felt. She simply reached for his hand and squeezed. "You came," she said. "You invited me. I hoped you'd believe you belonged here." "I don't," he said, half smiling. "You do," she said without blinking. "And tonight I'm going to prove it." Later, Elena took the stage. The room fell silent. The lights dimmed slightly, the air shifting. She didn't use a script. Just a single page she folded and tucked into her pocket. "I've spent much of my adult life building things," she began. "Companies, portfolios, partnerships. I've built walls too, ones that kept me moving forward fast and unbothered. But a few months ago, something happened that made one of those walls crack." She paused, her gaze scanning the room. Then it settled on him. "I saw a man, an exhausted, overworked man, hand over his child to a complete stranger so he could save someone else's life. Not knowing he was being watched, not knowing his kindness would ripple." Murmurs rose. Faces turned. Logan sank lower in his seat. That man didn't do it for recognition. He did it because it was right. And in doing so, he reminded me that the strongest people often speak the quietest truths. She took a breath. "We talk a lot in philanthropy about impact, about big numbers and bold changes. But sometimes impact is a father who reads bedtime stories by flashlight when the heat gets cut. A man who teaches others how to fix water heaters even when his own kitchen sink leaks. A parent who stays." Elena's voice thickened slightly. "Tonight, I want to honor that kind of strength. The kind that doesn't headline the news but changes lives all the same." Applause swelled. Logan sat, frozen, stunned, throat tight. He didn't see her step off the stage or move toward him until she was beside him again. She extended her hand. "Dance with me?" He hesitated. "You just gave a speech about me. I think that's enough attention for one night." She smiled. "Come on. One dance. I promise not to step on your feet." They moved slowly across the dance floor, a little awkward at first, then more naturally as the music flowed. Logan hadn't danced since his wedding. He barely remembered how. But Elena didn't care. She just held his hand, her other resting on his shoulder, and swayed like the rest of the world had fallen away. "You didn't have to say all that," he murmured. "I wanted to. It was personal. It was true." They looked at each other. Really looked. And for the first time, Logan didn't see Elena the executive, or Elena the savior. He saw the woman beneath the armor, a woman who had lost, a woman who had rebuilt, just like him. Just then, Hazel came bounding into the room from the children's area barefoot and glowing with joy. She spotted them on the dance floor and charged straight toward them. "Daddy." He scooped her up and Elena laughed. Hazel looked between them, then whispered something that made them both go still. "I want her to stay." Logan didn't reply, because in that moment, for the first time since everything fell apart, he believed. So did he. The sun had long since dipped below the Cincinnati skyline, but the glow inside the Granville ballroom remained golden and warm, like a held breath before something sacred. Guests filtered out, slowly trailing laughter and well wishes, but Logan remained seated near the edge of the dance floor, Hazel asleep in his arms, her little head resting against his chest. Her hair still smelled faintly of baby shampoo and crayons. The orchestra had gone quiet. Only the gentle hum of late-night cleanup remained, servers clearing glasses, distant chatter from staff. Elena stood a few paces away, speaking with an older woman in pearls who appeared to be thanking her profusely. When she finished, she turned toward Logan, her steps quiet, measured. She sat beside him, saying nothing at first. Hazel stirred slightly, and Logan gently rocked her back to sleep with the instinct of a father who had done this too many nights to count. "You gave her a night she'll never forget," Elena said softly. "She gave it to me first," he replied. They sat there just breathing for a moment, two people tethered not by accident but by 1,000 silent choices showing up, staying, listening, believing. "I wasn't sure I should come tonight," Logan confessed. "I thought I'd be out of place, that everyone would see what I really am." "And what's that?" she asked, someone just barely holding it all together. Elena turned toward him fully. "You know what I see? I see someone who's already done the hard part. He didn't walk away, even when everything inside him wanted to. He stayed, and Hazel knows that. She trusts that. He didn't speak. He couldn't." Elena's voice dipped lower. "I spent so many years building walls I thought would keep me from ever falling again. And then I met you, and Hazel. And I realized sometimes the fall isn't the end. Sometimes it's where everything begins." She reached into her small evening clutch and pulled something out, a delicate silver locket oval-shaped with a fine etching across the front. She pressed it into Logan's hand without explanation. He opened it. Inside was a photo. Not of her, but of a hospital wristband. It bore the name Baby Girl Halberg, with a birth date from nearly 2 decades earlier. My daughter Elena said barely above a whisper. "I never even got to hold her, just saw her once through the glass before they took her away. I wasn't brave enough to fight back then. I let others decide what was best for me for her." Logan's breath hitched. "Elena." She shook her head gently. "I'm not telling you this to gain sympathy. I'm telling you because for the first time in my life I want something I've never let myself want. Something real." She looked down at Hazel, then back up at him. Her eyes shimmered with something both terrifying and breathtaking. "I know I can't take Holly's place, and I'm not trying to. But I love her, Logan, and I love what I feel when I'm with you. I want to be part of this, of both of you." Logan couldn't breathe. The words were simple, but they shattered something inside him. In a good way, in a necessary way. Elena reached out and gently touched Hazel's hair. "If you'd let me, I'd like to stay. Not just for visits, not just for good days, but for all of it, for bedtime stories and sick days and pancakes that get burned." She swallowed hard. "Can I be her mom?" The question didn't hang awkwardly in the air. It landed, like truth, like hope, like an answer to a prayer Logan never dared speak aloud. He didn't speak. Not right away. Instead, he stood slowly, still holding Hazel in his arms, and turned to face Elena completely. His eyes were wet, raw, but steady. "You already are," he said. Elena's lip trembled, and when she stepped forward, Logan shifted Hazel gently into one arm and wrapped the other around her. They stood there, the three of them, in the soft glow of the ballroom's final flickering lights. No music played, no audience watched. And yet, it felt like the most important moment of their lives. Later that night, back at the apartment, Logan tucked Hazel into bed while Elena stood at the doorway, unsure whether to step in. Hazel, half asleep, reached for her. "Sing the song," she murmured. Elena blinked. "What song, sweet pea? The one from the box," Hazel mumbled. "You always play it." Elena stepped forward, sat at the edge of the bed, and opened the small wooden music box on the nightstand. The familiar tune danced into the quiet. Hazel smiled, then drifted into sleep. Elena closed the box and turned to Logan. "I didn't know she remembered." "She remembers everything," Logan said gently, "especially the people who make her feel safe." He reached for her hand, and this time she didn't hesitate. Out on the balcony, the wind had calmed. The city glowed beneath them, steady and unfazed. "You're not running anymore," Logan said quietly. "No," Elena agreed. "I'm done running. He looked at her. Then stay. Stay for pancakes. Stay for finger paints and spilled juice and nights where Hazel insists she's part unicorn. A smile tugged at her lips. That sounds like everything I never knew I needed. He leaned in, not out of obligation or chemistry or timing, but because it was right. Because healing had room for love, too. When their lips met, it wasn't rushed. It wasn't dramatic. It was true. Not the beginning of a love story, but the middle of one they'd already started without knowing it. And, at last, they were choosing it. Together. Spring arrived in quiet waves. It didn't crash in like some cinematic rebirth. It crept subtly and sweetly into Logan's world, the way the frost retreated from his windowsills, the way Hazel's drawing suddenly burst with more yellows and pinks than blues and grays, the way the apartment didn't feel like a place they were surviving, but somewhere they belonged. And on a Tuesday morning in late March, the sunlight poured across the kitchen table as Hazel sat barefoot, crunching cereal and humming off-key. The same music box the one Elena had given her sat open beside a row of colored pencils. She insisted it play during breakfast now. Elena says we should plant sunflowers on the balcony, Hazel said between bites. I told her they'd grow taller than the railing and block out the whole sky. Logan smiled as he flipped a pancake in the pan. That might be the point. I think she wants to make a jungle. Hazel giggled. A sunflower jungle. She's full of wild ideas, he said. Guess she fits right in. Hazel beamed like he'd just told her the world was made of glitter and soft blankets. Elena moved in 2 weeks after the gala, not with boxes and labels, but with small quiet pieces of herself, an extra toothbrush, fresh towels, books in the living room, a framed photo of her father. She sat beside Hazel's crafts on the shelf. It wasn't the kind of move people wrote songs about. It was better, because it was real. They had their rhythms now. Mornings filled with scrambled eggs, shoe-tying, and dashes for forgotten lunchboxes. Afternoons at the community center where Logan had taken on a full-time mentorship role teaching others how to repair what they once thought too broken to fix. Evenings were slower, softer. Hazel in the bath telling made-up stories. Elena reading poetry out loud while Logan cooked dinner. Sometimes just quiet. A shared glance, a brush of fingers. The ease of not needing to explain why silence could feel like safety. They never called it perfect, but they called it theirs. One Saturday, Logan stood by the workbench in the center's storage room sorting tools when he found the original folder Elena had handed him the first invitation to change, the one he almost walked away from. He flipped it open. His name was still there, typed clean and sharp like it had always been waiting. "You okay?" Elena leaned against the doorway, hair pulled back, smudge of flour on her cheek from baking muffins with Hazel. He held up the folder. "I almost said no, you know." She stepped inside. "I know. You really believed in me before I did." "I just held the mirror," she said gently. "You did the rest." He closed the folder and set it back on the shelf. Funny how life circles around. I thought I was the one saving people. Turns out I was the one being saved. Elena stepped closer, arms wrapping around his waist. We all needed saving, in our own ways. Logan nodded, then pulled her in tighter. "You were never just a chapter, Elena. You were the shift in the whole story." She looked up at him. "So were you." Later that evening, they sat on the fire escape with Hazel between them, bundled in a blanket, watching the first stars appear. Hazel pointed. "That one's mine." "You don't even know its name," Logan teased. "I don't need to," she said seriously. "I named it Hazel anyway." Elena laughed. "That sounds about right." Hazel leaned against her. "Do you think stars miss people?" "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Logan asked. "I mean, maybe the stars were people who got so full of love they popped, so now they just shine forever trying to reach back." Neither adult spoke for a moment. Then Elena whispered, "I think they do, baby, but I think they also find new people to shine for." Hazel yawned. "Like us, exactly like us." Inside, they tucked her in. She turned to Elena, eyes drooping. "Are you staying forever?" Elena kissed her forehead. "As long as you'll have me." Hazel nodded, already half asleep. "Good. I think you're already a mom." Logan stood in the doorway, watching them, something blooming in his chest he hadn't known he still had room for. Love. Not the fragile kind that needed grand declarations. The steady kind. The kind that stayed. Before bed, Logan and Elena sat on the couch, hands intertwined. The room was quiet, but not empty. "I never imagined this," he said. "Not after everything." Elena leaned her head on his shoulder. "Me neither. But I think I stopped needing to imagine, because this is better than anything I thought I deserved." She looked up at him. "You always deserved this. So did she. So did we." He kissed her gently. Not the kiss of fire and urgency, the kiss of home. And when the lights were off and the world stilled around them, Logan listened to the sound of Hazel's soft breathing, to the creak of the wind against the glass, to the memory of a moment not so long ago when he handed his daughter to a stranger and changed the course of all three of their lives. That stranger had become everything he never thought he'd find again. And now, in the soft, steady dark, the music box on Hazel's nightstand played its lullaby once more. A reminder that the world breaks, yes, but it also mends. And sometimes, if you're brave enough to reach across the broken places, you don't just heal. A single dad helped a female soldier in the rain. Then she got a letter that changed everything. The rain had been falling for hours, thick and heavy, like it meant to scrub the world clean. It drummed on the motel sign above Madison Greer's head, each drop cold enough to bite through her uniform, soak her skin, and settle into her bones. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, trying to stay upright as the wind whipped at her wet hair. The glassy-eyed clerk behind the reception desk barely looked up as he handed her back her military ID. "No card, no room. Sorry, ma'am." His voice had all the warmth of the weather. Madison tucked the ID back into the inside pocket of her jacket and took a breath that trembled as it left her. She didn't argue, didn't beg. She just stepped back outside into the rain. Her duffel bag dragged against the pavement as she moved toward the road. Her boots were caked in slush, shoulders bowed under exhaustion, her breath fogging in the autumn chill. She'd tried 3 different places in the last 2 hours, and they'd all said the same thing. No vacancy, no cash accepted, no sympathy. The street was empty. The town was asleep. No headlights, no buses, no cabs. Just the rain and her. A neon open sign flickered in a convenience store across the street, but she didn't have the energy to cross. Her legs had started to cramp, the duffel strap digging into her shoulder like a punishment. A part of her, the small stubborn corner that had carried her through 14 years of service, kept walking anyway. 1 more block. 1 more mile. Maybe someone would stop. Maybe a pair of headlights cut through the downpour behind her. She didn't turn around at first. Cars had passed her for the last half hour, ignoring the uniform, the soaked pack, the way she stood like someone with nowhere left to go. But this one slowed. The engine idled behind her. She turned slowly, rain streaming down her face. The truck was old, dented, reliable. The kind of truck a man owns for 20 years and fixes himself. The window rolled down halfway, and a man leaned out, late 30s, maybe 40, a square jaw and dark, tired eyes under a damp baseball cap. "You need a ride?" he asked, voice low, even. Madison didn't answer right away. She glanced at his hands. They were rough, calloused. Working hands. No twitchiness. No weapons. No flashing smile that meant something else. Just eyes that saw her, not a uniform, not a problem. Just her. Still she hesitated. "I'm not going far," he added. "But there's a diner a few blocks down. It's open late. You can dry off, get warm." The wind cut through her soaked clothes again, and that was answer enough. She nodded once and opened the door. The warmth hit her like a wave, stale coffee and motor oil, but better than the rain. She climbed in, closed the door, and settled the duffel on her lap like a shield. They didn't speak for the first few minutes. Just the swish of the windshield wipers and the hum of the engine. The truck creaked with every bump in the road. A stuffed dinosaur swung from the rearview mirror, its stitching worn its tail half unraveled. She looked at him sideways. He didn't glance back. "You military?" he asked, still facing the road. "I was," she said, then corrected herself. Technically. Army, yeah." He nodded like he already knew. "I used to be a medic. Navy corpsman. Iraq." She blinked at him, surprised. He didn't look like it. But then neither did she anymore. "You out now?" she asked. "Long time. Got a kid now. Keeps me grounded." They reached the diner, a squat building with a flickering sign and glowing windows. It looked like a postcard from 30 years ago, cheap pie-hot coffee and nobody asking questions. He pulled into the lot and turned off the ignition. Madison reached for the door handle, but he stopped her. "You got somewhere to stay?" he asked. She shook her head. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a folded 20, then opened the glove box and handed her a motel key. Room 4. Cheap keychain. Plastic tag. "I keep a room at that place near the tracks," he said. "Sometimes for guys coming out of detox. Sometimes for someone who just needs it. You can crash there. No strings." Madison stared at him. "Why?" He shrugged. "Because someone once did it for me." She took the keys slowly, like it might disappear. "You hungry?" he asked. She started to shake her head, but her stomach answered for her. He smiled just a little. "Let's get something warm, then." Inside the diner, the waitress knew him. Called him Luke. Told him Ellie missed him tonight. He smiled, said he'd read her the bedtime story twice to make up for it. They sat in a booth by the window, steam curling from mugs of coffee between them. Madison stared at her reflection in the glass. Wet hair, red eyes, a woman on the edge, and realized it was the first time all day someone had looked at her like she wasn't broken. Luke didn't pry. He just ate his pie and offered her his half. She took it. When he dropped her off at the motel, she paused before getting out. "Thanks," she said. He nodded. "Get some rest." She walked to the room key, clenched in hand. But before going inside, she glanced back. The truck was still there, headlights glowing dimly through the mist, like he was waiting to make sure she'd made it in. She didn't wave. He didn't need it. But she stood in the doorway a long time, holding the key and thinking about how long it had been since someone stopped in the rain, and how sometimes it was enough to change everything. The motel room was barely bigger than a storage unit, with one flickering overhead light and the faint scent of mildew soaked into the walls. But to Madison, it felt like sanctuary. She peeled off her wet uniform with shaking hands and sank into the creaky mattress without even pulling back the covers. Her boots sat by the door, dripping quietly onto the mat. Her duffel bag rested beside them, everything she owned compressed into canvas and memory. Sleep came in fragments. Rain tapped at the window all night like it had something urgent to say. In her dreams, faces blurred people she'd served with people she couldn't save, people she tried not to remember. A door slammed somewhere down the hall and she jolted upright, heart pounding as if she were back in uniform, crouched behind sandbags waiting for orders that never came. When the sun finally rose pale and watery behind the clouds, Madison lay still for a long time, staring at the cracked ceiling. She'd survived Warzone's tribunal's betrayal. But somehow, waking up alone without purpose, without orders, this was harder. She reached for the folded motel key still on the nightstand and held it in her palm. It wasn't the room that mattered. It was the man who'd handed it to her without question. Luke. Just a name spoken once by the waitress. A man with quiet eyes, a little girl who missed bedtime stories, and a truck full of silence and warmth. She checked out of the motel 2 hours later. The clerk didn't recognize her. "Guy who paid for it, he come here often?" she asked. The clerk shrugged. "Sometimes. He drops off the envelopes. Pays in advance for strangers. Don't talk much. How do you reach him?" "You don't?" That was that. Madison stepped back out into the gray morning, her duffel slung across her back. She should have left it there, chalked it up to kindness from a stranger, and moved on. but something itched in her chest, something unfinished, something like hope. She headed toward the diner. The bell over the door jingled when she stepped inside. The place was mostly empty this early, save for a couple of elderly men reading newspapers and a teenager scrolling on his phone behind the counter. The same waitress from the night before appeared with a coffee pot and a warm smile. "Back already? Hungry looking for someone?" Madison said. "Luke." The waitress paused, eyes narrowing just slightly. "You a friend? I'm trying to be." She studied Madison for a moment longer, then nodded. "You just missed him. Works morning shifts 2 blocks over church maintenance. Try St. Joseph's. He's always early." The church loomed modestly at the edge of town, its stone steeple gray against the thick clouds. It wasn't fancy, but it had a quiet dignity, much like the man Madison hoped to find. She spotted him before he noticed her kneeling beside a flower bed, hands caked in damp soil. Sleeves rolled up his flannel shirt stained with work and time. He was humming something low and tuneless. Madison stood at the gate for a moment, unsure what to say. Then he looked up, saw her, and nodded like he'd been expecting her all along. "You found the place," he said. "I wasn't sure if I should." Luke stood brushing his hands on his jeans. "If you had nowhere else to be, then, yeah, you should." She smiled faintly, arms crossed against the chill. "You help a lot of people, don't you?" He shrugged. "Used to need a lot of help myself." There was no pride in his voice, just truth. Madison followed him as he walked toward the side of the church where a rusted storage shed leaned wearily against the brick wall. He opened it and pulled out a set of tools, handing her a wrench without asking. "If you're staying, you might as well earn your keep." She grinned. Subtle. They worked in silence, fixing the broken hinges on a warped door, reattaching gutter brackets. Her hands remembered how to be useful. It felt good. Grounding. For the first time in weeks, the buzzing in her head dulled. Afterward, they sat on the back steps of the church, sipping lukewarm coffee from a thermos. "I used to be someone," she said quietly. "You still are." She didn't reply. Just watched the steam rise from her cup like smoke from a fire long burned out. "I'm not going to ask why you were walking in the rain," Luke said after a while. "But I know that kind of silence, the kind you wear like armor." Her eyes filled unexpectedly. She looked away. "I'm not used to people seeing through it." "Maybe you've been around the wrong people." She wanted to say something sharp, something defensive, but instead she just nodded. Luke stood, stretched, and pulled something from his pocket. It was a folded photograph, frayed at the edges. He handed it to her without explanation. In the picture, a young Luke smiled awkwardly, wearing fatigues, standing beside another man, taller, darker, laughing with an arm slung around Luke's shoulders. "My brother in arms," Luke said, "didn't make it home. I tried to save him. I didn't." Madison stared at the photo, her throat tightening. "I know that weight," she whispered. He nodded. "Then you know why I stop when I see someone in the rain." She held the picture with reverence, then handed it back. "You did more than stop," she said. "You made me feel human again." Luke said nothing, just nodded and pocketed the photo. As Madison walked away, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of damp leaves and earth. She didn't know where she was going yet, but for the first time in weeks, she wasn't afraid to find out. In her pocket, the motel key still rested like a promise. And behind her, Luke returned to the flowers, humming again, planting seeds he might never see bloom, but planting them anyway. The envelope was thick, stamped, sealed, and oddly formal, even by military standards. Madison found it wedged between junk mail and a pamphlet about veteran health services when she checked the small rusted mailbox at the transitional housing facility. She had only given out the address once to complete the paperwork for her upcoming administrative hearing. She tore the envelope open with her thumb, bracing herself for more bureaucracy, another form to complete another question, to defend another delay in the decision that would determine whether she received full veteran benefits or nothing at all. But the moment she read the first line, her breath caught. Supplemental testimony submitted. In support of subject Madison Greer, Lieutenant, retired. She blinked hard, reading the name again. Then again. It was real. Her fingers tightened around the paper as she scanned further. The language was formal government speak, dry and deliberate, but the content hit her like a sudden gust of wind. A man named Luke Harrison had submitted a first-hand account detailing a firefight in Fallujah, 2009. He had not been present during Madison's recent case, but his testimony tied to a separate but related incident years ago validated the pattern she had reported: repeated negligence of protocol by a high-ranking officer who now stood at the center of her tribunal. Luke's statement was calm, clear, and detailed, and deeply personal. "I don't know Lieutenant Greer beyond a brief meeting," he wrote, "but I've seen this before. I've carried the guilt of silence. If she has the courage to speak, then the least I can do is tell what I know." Madison sank onto the edge of her bed, hands trembling. The room felt suddenly too small, the air too sharp. She hadn't asked him. She hadn't even told him her full name. But he'd remembered. Somehow, in that short ride in that cold diner booth, he'd seen enough to believe her. Enough to risk being pulled into a system he had long since walked away from. And he'd done it anyway. The next day, Madison stood before the panel. 3 high-backed chairs, a long table, files and laptops, cold faces with warm words that didn't mean much. They asked her the same questions again. She gave the same answers. But this time, she wasn't alone. They acknowledged the supplemental testimony. Not just acknowledged it, changed the tone in the room. The woman in the center, a colonel with tired eyes and a no-nonsense tone, flipped through Luke's statement twice. Her voice softened. "You have someone speaking for you, Lieutenant. That doesn't happen often." Madison sat a little straighter. When it was over, they told her they would reach a decision within 2 weeks. She nodded, saluted, and walked out into the sunlight. The sky was finally clear. She didn't go back to her room, didn't feel like hiding between 4 cinder-block walls. Her feet led her down familiar sidewalks past brick buildings and faded flags until she found herself at the little diner again. The bell jingled when she walked in. The same waitress looked up from pouring coffee. "He's not here right now, honey," I know Madison replied. "I just needed to sit somewhere warm." The waitress gave her a look something between understanding and permission, then slid a coffee across the counter. "It's on the house." Madison sipped it slowly, letting the steam rise into her face. Then she pulled a folded note from her jacket. Not an official document. Just a thank-you letter. Personal. Honest. She had written it 3 times and torn it up each time. This version she kept. An hour later, she walked back to the church. The back gate was open. The leaves had started to turn the first golds and ambers of a slow-coming fall scattered along the gravel path. Luke was fixing a section of chain-link fence behind the playground. His jacket hung on a post, and Ellie, his daughter, sat cross-legged on a picnic bench nearby, drawing with markers on a notepad. When she saw Madison, her face lit up. "Dad, it's the rain lady." Luke looked up, a wrench still in hand. "Madison," she offered a sheepish wave. "Your daughter's got a good memory." Ellie held up a drawing. "It's you. I drew your army jacket and your boots. Want it?" Madison knelt down, touched by the simple gesture. The picture was crude but sweet, her under a gray sky, a stick figure in camouflage, smiling faintly. "Thank you," she whispered. Luke came over, wiping his hands on his jeans. He didn't ask why she was there. She handed him the letter. "I didn't know how else to say thank you," she said. "But I wanted you to know what your words did." He took the note, but didn't open it. Just tucked it into his back pocket like it was something sacred. "I meant them," he said simply. "I know." A beat of silence passed. Wind rustled through the playground slide. Birds chirped as if the world had decided to start singing again. "I didn't think anyone would stand up for me," Madison admitted. "Not after all this time. Not someone who didn't even know me. I didn't need to know." You, Luke said. I've seen enough to recognize the look in someone's eyes when they're carrying more than they should." He paused, then added quietly, "I know what it's like to speak out too late." Madison looked at him, then not as a stranger who'd offered kindness in the rain, but as a man with his own scars, his own ghosts. And something else, the quiet strength of someone who decided to keep showing up even when no one was watching. "Sometimes late is still right on time," she said. Ellie ran up and took her hand. "Want to stay for dinner?" Luke hesitated. "Only if you're not in a hurry." Madison smiled. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't. And in that small moment, under an open sky with leaves beginning to fall, 3 people sat on a porch with spaghetti and lemonade. And not a single one of them was alone. There were certain silences. Madison had grown used to those heavy leaden ones that settled between soldiers who'd seen too much. The kind that didn't require words because everyone already understood. But the silence between her and Luke was different. It wasn't heavy, it wasn't cold, it was steady, like the quiet hum of an engine that never failed to start. Like safety. That night after dinner, as Ellie curled up on the couch in her pajamas watching an old cartoon on low volume, Madison and Luke stood in the kitchen side by side rinsing dishes. The simplicity of it felt almost sacred. 2 adults sharing space, not in a rush to fill it with small talk or retreat into solitude. "You always cook that much spaghetti?" Madison asked, nudging him with her elbow. Luke half smiled. Occupational hazard. Grew up in a big family. Cooking less than 5 servings feels unnatural. She looked at him. Then really looked at him, not just the tired eyes or the faint scar near his temple, but the quiet lines of someone who'd lived hard and chose to keep loving anyway. "Were they all like you?" she asked. He paused for a beat, drying his hands. "Some better, some worse. I was the one who left and didn't come back until too much had changed." There was no bitterness in his voice, just fact, just history. Madison leaned against the counter. "You ever talk about what happened over there?" Luke shook his head. "Not unless it helps somebody else." She understood that, understood it too well. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a folded paper yellowed at the corners. Carefully he opened it and laid it on the table. It was a photo, Luke and another soldier, arms slung around each other, laughing in desert sun. "That's Mason," he said quietly. "He didn't make it home. Got hit in an IED blast while we were transporting wounded." Madison sat slowly, her breath catching. She'd seen so many of these pictures, smiling faces, frozen in time, men and women who wouldn't get a second chapter. "I was the one driving," Luke said. "We were supposed to rotate, but I told him to rest. I thought—" He stopped the words, cracking mid-sentence. "You thought you were protecting him," Madison finished gently. He nodded. "Instead, I gave him the front seat." Silence again, but not empty. Charged. Deep. "I carry a list in my head," Madison said after a moment. "Names, faces, birthdays. Things I should have done differently." Luke looked up. "You too, doesn't everyone?" He shrugged. "Some people bury it. Some drink it away. I fix fences and feed people I'll never see again." Madison reached for the photo, traced the corner. "Do you ever feel like you're making up for something you can't fix?" Luke met her gaze. Every day. And just like that, something inside her shifted. Not broken, not cracked, but opened. A door long sealed shut. The next morning, Madison visited the Community Resource Center, where she'd once attended a job readiness seminar she barely remembered. This time, she wasn't just passing through. She filled out an application for a part-time program assisting veterans with reintegration, something Maria Torres had mentioned in passing weeks ago, but Madison hadn't been ready for then. Now, she was. Afterward, she returned to the church not because she needed to, but because she wanted to. Luke was out back again this time, repairing a swing set. The metal frame, rusted but sturdy. "Need a hand," she called. He didn't look surprised to see her. Just passed her a wrench like it was the most natural thing in the world. As they worked, he nodded toward Ellie, who was on the steps coloring. "She's why I didn't spiral after I got out," he said softly. "When you've got someone depending on you, it changes the way you process pain." Madison tightened a bolt. "You ever feel like you're just barely holding things together? Only on the days that end in E." She laughed, really laughed for the first time in what felt like years. Later, as they packed up the tools, Luke said, "You know, there's something I didn't tell you." Madison raised a brow. "That's ominous." He hesitated. "I didn't plan to testify. I didn't even know your full name until I heard the girl at the diner call you Lieutenant. I recognized the unit. Looked it up. What you were doing. It hit me." Madison waited, heart stilled. "You were trying to say what I never could, what I should have said when it was my turn." He met her eyes then, and there was nothing performative in it. No savior complex, no dramatic flair. Just a man who once walked away from his own truth and saw someone brave enough to do what he hadn't. "I didn't want to fail you too," he added. Madison felt tears prick the corners of her eyes. Not from guilt, not even from sorrow, but from something deeper being seen. "I didn't think anyone noticed," she whispered. "I noticed," Luke said, "and I wasn't the only one." That night, as she walked back to her room under a cloud-streaked sky, Madison stopped at a mailbox on the corner. She held an envelope in her hand, a letter addressed not to an office or an appeal board, but to someone she hadn't spoken to in a long time, her younger brother Sam. He'd served, too. Left the military years before her. They hadn't spoken since the day she blew the whistle. He'd thought it was a betrayal, that she should have kept quiet. But now she wanted him to know she didn't walk away, and neither did the man who stood with her when she didn't even know she needed it. She slid the letter into the box, exhaled slowly, and looked up. Above her, the clouds had parted just enough to show a single shining star. Not much, but just enough. The next Saturday morning was soft and golden, the kind of autumn day that made you believe the world hadn't given up on beauty just yet. Sunlight filtered through amber leaves as Madison walked up the cracked walkway to Luke's modest home. The porch creaked as she stepped onto it. For the first time in a long while, her heart was oddly light. She wasn't sure if she was visiting as a friend or just someone trying to hold on to what made her feel steady. The screen door opened before she could knock. Ellie stood there, all gap-toothed grin and sleepy eyes, wearing a hoodie 2 sizes too big and socks that didn't match. She didn't say hi or ask why Madison was there. She simply said, "You're just in time. We haven't started the pancakes yet." Madison blinked. "That's very specific hospitality." Ellie shrugged. "Dad always says people come back when they feel safe." Luke appeared behind her, wiping his hands on a towel, his hair still wet from the shower. "She's not wrong," he said, smiling. It was the first time Madison had seen him relaxed, unburdened by a wrench or a story. Just a man in his home on a Saturday flipping pancakes for a kid who still believed mornings were worth getting excited about. "You sure I'm not intruding?" Madison asked, hesitating on the step. Luke opened the door wider. "You sure you don't want blueberries in your pancakes?" That was his answer, and it was enough. They sat at the small table by the window, the kitchen warm with the smell of butter and cinnamon. Ellie chattered as she drew on the back of a grocery list, narrating a fantasy story about a brave lady soldier who built a secret treehouse for kids who had bad dreams. Madison listened with one elbow propped on the table, a smirk tugging at her lips. "She sounds like she has good taste in camouflage," she said. Ellie looked up. "You think so? I think she's kind of lonely. But she's good at pretending she isn't." Madison went still. Luke across the table didn't say a word, just glanced at his daughter, then at Madison. Children never needed to be taught how to see truth. They came with that gift. "I used to pretend a lot," Madison said, her voice low. "Still do sometimes." Ellie, unconcerned, returned to her drawing. Pretending is okay as long as someone notices you're doing it. The words landed like a stone in Madison's chest softly and all at once. She looked at Luke. He didn't say anything, he didn't have to. Later, Ellie tugged Madison outside to the small backyard, which was more weeds than grass, but charming in its own unruly way. A half-built treehouse stood off-center near the back fence, its wooden frame still raw and unfinished. "We started this last year," Ellie said, pointing up. "But Dad got too busy. He said one day we'll finish it when life slows down." Madison squinted up at the structure. "You think it ever will slow down?" Ellie asked. Madison nodded. "Nope," Ellie said cheerfully, "but we can still finish the treehouse anyway." It was the kind of logic only a child could deliver, and somehow it made more sense than anything Madison had heard in months. "I think we can work with that," she murmured. She stepped back and surveyed the project. "You got a hammer." Ellie grinned and darted toward the shed. Luke walked out onto the porch just as Madison rolled up her sleeves. "I'm not sure you know what you're signing up for." "I built field barracks in monsoons," Madison said. "I think I can handle a treehouse." Luke tilted his head. "You're sure this isn't a tactical excuse to spend your Saturday with us, maybe? But at least I brought my own boots." They worked all afternoon, taking turns sawing, drilling balancing beams, while Ellie offered detailed architectural advice from the ground. Madison hadn't used her hands like this in years, not for anything that didn't involve signing forms, filling reports, or holding on through the night. As she drilled the last bolt into a crossbeam, she felt something inside her settle. A rhythm, a sense of place. It wasn't about building something tall or grand. It was about building something that didn't need to be perfect, only present. Just like people. By late afternoon, they sat on the porch steps with lemonade and tired arms. Ellie had passed out inside, curled up with her drawing pad still in hand. "She draws you a lot," Luke said. Madison chuckled. "I noticed. She told me last week that you reminded her of a hawk. Serious, strong kind of quiet, but always watching." Madison laughed softly. "That might be the best compliment I've ever gotten." Luke looked at her then, not just across the porch, but into her. The way people do when they've stopped being afraid to ask the questions that matter. "You ever think about staying?" The words hung in the air. Madison didn't flinch. "Sometimes," she said. "But I don't know if I know how." "You learn by trying," he said. "Same way you learn how to hold a hammer or read a kid's mind." She looked out over the yard, the treehouse standing proudly in the late light. "Maybe it's not about staying," she said slowly. "Maybe it's about choosing where to return to." Luke nodded. "That's a good place to start." As the sun dipped below the trees and evening stretched out over the quiet neighborhood, Madison felt a peace she hadn't trusted in years. Not because everything was perfect. Not because her past was erased or her future guaranteed. But because, for once, someone had noticed she was pretending, and simply chose to stay. Not to fix her, just to build something beside her, even if it started with a crooked treehouse and blueberry pancakes. By the time Madison stepped into the low-slung brick building labeled Veteran Resource and Renewal Center, the scent of brewed coffee and dry paper filled the air. It wasn't warm in the cozy sense more institutional, lined with posters about PTSD workshops and nutrition, but it was familiar. Predictable. Safe. She stood just inside the doorway, watching a group of 5 men and women gathered around a long table listening intently to a petite woman in her 50s with short, silver-streaked hair and a clipboard. She was mid-sentence, but paused when she noticed Madison. "You must be Lieutenant Greer," the woman said with a nod of recognition. "Maria Torres." Maria walked over her presence, calm but commanding, the kind of person who didn't need volume to be heard. Her handshake was firm and her eyes, clear, intelligent, missed nothing. "We've been following your hearing," Maria said without preamble. "I've read your reports. What you did was brave." Madison offered a polite smile. "Some people would say it was reckless." Maria returned a knowing look. "Usually the ones it exposes." Madison exhaled softly. "I'm not here for congratulations. I'm just trying to figure out where I fit now. You and half the people in this building." Maria gestured for her to follow. "Come, Sit in for the second half of today's workshop. No pressure to speak. Just observe." They entered the back of the room. A circle of veterans sat, some in uniform, some in plain clothes, all bearing the quiet exhaustion of people who had returned from something no one else could see. Their faces were lined with years, stories, guilt, strength. Madison knew those expressions intimately. "Today's topic is re-entry identity," Maria continued. "Who you were in service, who you think you're supposed to be now, who you're allowed to become." One man spoke up first, maybe 50 hands, rough knees, bouncing with nervous energy. "I feel like I was important once. Now I just get in the way at the grocery store." A woman added, "I can't even sleep next to my husband anymore." He breathes too softly. "I wake up thinking I've lost someone." Heads nodded, murmured agreements, and then a long silence. Maria turned to Madison. Lieutenant Madison stiffened slightly. She hadn't planned to talk, but the eyes around the room weren't demanding, just hopeful. She cleared her throat. "I used to know exactly who I was. And then one day I said something that changed everything. I stood up for what I believed in, and lost my career, most of my friends, and a sense of belonging. Some days I wonder if it was worth it." No one interrupted. Madison continued. "But a stranger stopped in the rain one night. He didn't know me, didn't ask what I'd done. He just saw I was tired and wet and alone, and for the first time in months I didn't feel invisible. The room was still. It reminded me that the uniform wasn't the only thing that made me worth saving." Maria, her voice soft, said, "That's the kind of reminder most of us need." After the session, Madison stepped into the hallway emotionally drained but strangely lighter. Maria walked beside her. "I'd like you to consider joining our peer support facilitation program," she said. "You've got experience, and more importantly, you've got presence." Madison raised an eyebrow. "Presence. People listen when you speak, because you only speak when it matters." Madison laughed under her breath. "I've been accused of being too quiet." "Then let me reframe it," Maria said. "You don't waste air. That's rare." Madison didn't give her answer right away, but something inside her already knew. That evening, Madison made her way back to Luke's place. She hadn't called ahead. Somehow, she didn't think she had to. The porch light was already on when she arrived. Ellie was lying on her stomach in the living room drawing what looked like a castle with antennas. Luke sat on the couch reading an old paperback glasses sliding halfway down his nose. When Madison stepped inside, Ellie looked up and announced, "I drew you again." Madison laughed. "Oh, what am I doing this time?" Ellie held up the picture. It was a stick figure version of Madison standing in front of a classroom of other stick figures, all of them smiling. "You're helping the ones with invisible OEs," she explained. "Like Daddy's shoulder, but in their heads." Madison blinked. Luke set his book aside. "You okay?" She nodded slowly. I think I might have found something today. Or maybe it found me." He waited. I was in a room full of people carrying things no one else could see, and they weren't pretending they were fine. I didn't either, and it felt honest. Luke's voice was steady. "That's more rare than you think." She walked over to the couch, sat beside him. "Maria thinks I could help. Not with answers, just by being there. Holding space." Luke smiled. "Funny. That's how I see what I do every day. I don't fix the fence so people stop falling down. I fix it so they know someone still cares if they fall." Madison looked at him. "You think I can do that too. I think you've already started." Much later that night, as Luke tucked Ellie into bed, she whispered something that made him pause. "Daddy." "Yeah. When people help, does that make them family?" He smiled and brushed her hair back. "Sometimes, yeah. The best kind. The kind you choose." Ellie yawned. "Then I think Madison's family." Luke didn't answer right away, just kissed her forehead and turned off the lamp. In the hallway, Madison waited, eyes misty. She'd heard it. "Didn't mean to eavesdrop," she said softly. "I'm glad you did." They stood there in the half-light, something unsaid lingering between them. Not romantic, not quite, at least not yet, but real, rooted, growing. Because sometimes when the rain doesn't choose sides, neither do the people who reach out their hands. And Madison was starting to believe. Maybe she'd been chosen too. The sky darkened faster than usual that Wednesday, as if the clouds themselves were remembering something heavy. By late afternoon, the wind had picked up, whistling through the gutters like a warning. Madison stared out the window of the community center, watching leaves swirl across the parking lot. She was supposed to lead her first peer support session that evening. Maria had told her she was ready. The veterans trusted her. She'd earned this moment. But she couldn't shake the heaviness in her chest. Something was wrong. An hour later at Luke's house, the phone buzzed repeatedly on the counter. Luke silenced it with a sigh. He was standing over the stove, stirring a pot of soup with one hand, rubbing his temples with the other. Ellie lay on the couch, pale and groggy cheeks flushed with fever. He'd already called off his shift at the church and the part-time night job he'd recently picked up to cover repairs on the truck. He couldn't afford to miss it, but Ellie came first. Always had. He placed a damp cloth across her forehead. Her eyes fluttered open. "Are you staying?" she mumbled. "Of course I'm staying," he whispered, brushing her hair back. "I'm right here." She nodded sleepily, her little hand curling around his finger. At the same moment, Madison pulled into the driveway with 2 paper bags balanced in her arms. She had picked up groceries after her orientation milk tea children's medicine and Luke's favorite instant coffee. She hadn't planned to stay, but something told her he might need backup. The door creaked open before she could knock. Luke looked exhausted, his flannel sleeves rolled up the worry plane in the lines around his eyes. She, "Okay," Madison asked, gently stepping in. "She's burning up," he said. "I've been giving her fluids, but her breathing's shallow. If it doesn't break by morning, we'll need to go in." Madison set the bags down and knelt beside Ellie, touching the girl's clammy skin. "Let me help," she said softly. "You look like you haven't slept since last year." Luke didn't argue. He just sat heavily at the kitchen table, eyes distant, hand pressed to the back of his neck like he was holding himself together by instinct alone. As the rain began to lash against the windows, Madison made tea and brought him a cup. He stared into it like it held some kind of answer. "She's all I've got," he said finally, voice rough. "I know," Madison said. "No, I mean she's all I've got. There's no backup plan. No family to call. No one to take her if something happens to me. If I fall apart, you won't." He looked at her hollow and bare. "I can't afford to." Madison sat across from him, steady and firm. "Then let me be the part you lean on." His jaw tightened. "You shouldn't have to." "Maybe not," she said, "but you stopped for me in the rain. You didn't have to then, either." Silence. Then, almost too softly to hear, he murmured, "I'm scared." Madison reached across the table, her hand closing over his. "You don't have to be. Not alone." The night deepened. Thunder rolled low across the hills. Madison stayed. She helped Luke sponge Ellie's forehead, read her books aloud when she stirred, and sat with Luke through the long stretches of quiet. At 2 a.m., the fever finally broke. Ellie, still half asleep, murmured, "Did the storm go away?" Madison kissed her temple. "Not yet, sweetheart. But we're here with you." In the living room, Luke exhaled so deeply it was almost a sob. He rubbed his face and stood slowly, muscles aching from tension and hours of stillness. "Thank you," he said. "You didn't have to stay." "I wasn't leaving," Madison replied. And she meant it. The next morning brought a fragile calm. Sunlight broke through the clouds in streaks, drying the sidewalks and painting the wet leaves in shades of fire and gold. Ellie sat up on the couch, sipping warm broth. Madison sat beside her, gently braiding the girl's tangled hair. Luke stepped outside for a moment of air, the first he'd taken in what felt like days. When he came back in, he found Madison kneeling near Ellie's backpack, helping her sort out school papers and coloring pages. She looked up, smiled softly. "Guess I missed my session last night," she said. He tilted his head. "You led one here." She stood and brushed off her knees. "I never imagined myself part of a family again. Not like this. Not—" Quietly. Luke stepped closer. "It's not quiet. It's just not loud in the way we were trained to hear." He paused. "You could stay, you know. I mean, not permanently if you're not ready. Just longer. As long as you want." Madison looked at him. Not with fear, not with doubt, but with the steady, measured understanding of someone who'd known battlefields of every kind and finally found one worth defending with tenderness. "I already have," she said. That afternoon, after Ellie drifted into a deep, healing sleep, Madison stepped outside. The porch was warm in the late sun. She pulled out her notebook, the one she hadn't touched in months. She opened to a blank page and wrote one line, "You don't need to be strong alone. You just need someone who won't walk away." She closed the book gently. Inside, Luke was humming a familiar tune as he washed the soup pot. There were no trumpets, no victory parades, just two hands moving in rhythm and the quiet hum of a house that, for the first time in a long time, felt like home. The storm had come and passed, but what stayed behind was something far more powerful. The community center was quiet that morning. No footsteps in the hall, no shuffling chairs or murmured greetings. Just sunlight filtering through the dusty blinds and the soft click of Maria's pen tapping against her clipboard. Madison sat across from her in the office, hands folded over a piece of stationery. She had borrowed it from the front desk, a plain white page with a faint navy border. No emblem, no insignia, just space. The words were already written, in ink, in her own voice. Maria hadn't asked what was in the letter. She simply said, "When you're ready." Madison wasn't sure she was, but she was here, and that had to count for something. The night before, after Luke and Ellie had gone to bed, Madison had walked out onto the porch alone. The air was cool, still carrying the scent of the storm. She sat with her knees drawn up, the notebook open in her lap, heart heavier than she'd expected. She had meant to write something simple. A thank you, perhaps. A reflection on how far she had come. But what came out was something else entirely. It started with, "To the stranger who stopped in the rain. You didn't ask my name. You didn't ask what I had done or what I had lost. You only saw that I was cold-tired and human. And in a world that constantly asks us to prove our worth, that was the most radical kindness I've ever known." The rest of the letter spilled like breath slow, careful, full of things she hadn't allowed herself to say. She wrote about the day she filed her report, about the silence that followed, the colleagues who looked the other way, the commanding officer who called her emotional, the months of investigations, the nights she barely slept. She wrote about the fear that no one would ever believe her again. And then she wrote about him, Luke, how one act of decency cracked something open, how he never asked for anything in return, how Ellie's quiet acceptance healed places inside Madison that even the military couldn't reach. "You gave me shelter," she wrote, "but more than that, you gave me a reason to believe that the war I fought was not for nothing." When she finished the letter, she stared at it for a long time. It didn't feel like closure. It felt like continuation. Back in the present, Maria gestured toward the open door. "The group's starting. You still want to read it?" Madison nodded. "Yes, I think they need to hear it. I think I do." They entered the common room. A dozen veterans sat in the circle, familiar faces now. One man with a prosthetic leg balanced a cup of coffee on his knee. A woman with salt and pepper braids nodded as Madison took her seat. Maria gave her a quiet nod. It was time. Madison cleared her throat. "I wrote this last night," she said. "I didn't know I needed to until I did. It's not directed at anyone in particular, but maybe you'll see parts of yourself in it." "I know I did." She unfolded the letter and began to read. Silence settled as she spoke, not the hollow kind, but full and reverent. Madison's voice didn't shake, not from fear, but from depth. Each word landed like a soft footfall on sacred ground. When she reached the end, her final line, "I am not healed, but I am no longer invisible." There wasn't applause, there were no cheers, only the kind of stillness that meant people were listening. And one by one, veterans began to nod. The man with the prosthetic whispered, "That's the first time I've heard someone say what I've felt." Another woman reached over and touched Madison's hand. "Thank you," she said simply, "for carrying that until the rest of us could hear it." Maria, standing in the back of the room, blinked back something close to tears. Later, she told Madison that letter was a mirror, and for the first time some of them saw their reflection and didn't look away. That afternoon, Madison placed a copy of the letter in a sealed envelope and handed it to Maria. "For the new guys," she said, "in case they come in on a day I can't be here." Maria smiled. "You will always be here, even when you're not." Outside, the autumn wind picked up scattering leaves across the sidewalk like gold coins from a broken jar. Madison stood under the awning watching them fall. She thought about Luke, how he'd told her once that helping people wasn't about fixing them. It was about not walking away when the pain made them hard to love. She understood that now, because someone had stayed, and now so would she. That evening, Luke was back at the church repairing a leaky pipe when Madison arrived. She didn't say anything at first, just sat on the steps watching the golden light filter through the stained glass. He joined her after a while, wiping his hands on a rag, the familiar warmth of his presence settling beside her. She pulled the original letter from her bag and handed it to him. He unfolded it slowly, reading in silence. When he finished, he didn't say anything for a long time. Then, quietly, "You didn't have to say any of this. I know," she replied, "but I wanted you to know how far one good man's choice can go." Luke looked at her, really looked. "You're not invisible either," he said, and in that moment, no one was. Not the girl in the rain, not the man with the wrench, not the little girl inside sleeping peacefully for the first time in days. The letter had begun in the storm, but where it ended was here, in sunlight, with hearts still mending, but no longer alone. The first frost of the season came with little warning. A thin veil of silver clung to rooftops, curled around the edges of windows, and coated the town in a soft, silent shimmer. Madison rose early, tugging on a thick sweater, her breath visible in the dim kitchen light as she poured 2 mugs of coffee, one black one with cream. Luke would be arriving soon to help prep for the veterans' morning workshop. But even before he knocked, she heard the familiar rhythm of his boots on the porch. She opened the door with a smile. "Do you ever knock?" she asked. He lifted one brow. "Would it make me more polite, or just less predictable?" She handed him the coffee. "Both." Luke stepped inside, grateful for the warmth. His cheeks were pink from the chill, his eyes a little heavier than usual. "You all right?" Madison asked, closing the door behind him. He nodded, then hesitated. "Got a letter last night." Madison set her mug down. From who Luke pulled an envelope from his coat pocket. He handed it to her unsealed. Her eyes scanned the header center for veteran reintegration and community support position offer. Transitional support trainer. Her brows rose. "This is, they want me to join, full-time," Luke said. "Facilitate field workshops, train incoming volunteers, even speak on behalf of the center during community outreach events." Madison's heart jumped. "That's incredible." Luke didn't smile. I turned it down. The silence was sudden, sharp. "You what?" She said, not out of judgment, but disbelief. He ran a hand through his hair. "I've got Ellie. I've got the church work. You've got a chance to step into something bigger than you," Madison cut in gently. "You know that, right?" He looked at her. "I do, and it terrifies me." Madison sat on the armrest of the couch mug balanced on her knee. Why, she asked softer now. Because I already tried being someone once, when I was a corpsman, when I thought maybe I mattered. And when I lost Mason, when I came back broken, I wasn't useful anymore. I was just a man who used to be something. She let his words hang in the air, let the truth of them settle like dust. Then she said, "You've never stopped being someone, Luke. You just stopped believing other people needed you. But they do. I do." He looked away, jaw clenched. "I'm not sure I know how to lead anymore," he murmured. Madison got up, walked over and placed the letter back in his hand. Then, do it scared. Later that week, Luke accepted the offer. Quietly, no announcement, no celebration. Just a nod to Maria across the hall, a signature on a dotted line, and the understanding that he was finally walking back into something that had once broken him with new strength, and this time not alone. Madison watched from the doorway as he met with the program director, his posture straight, his voice calm. When their eyes met across the room, he gave her the smallest smile. It was enough. The following Sunday, Ellie stood proudly beside the nearly finished treehouse as Luke fastened the final railing into place. Madison helped secure the ladder, and the three of them stepped back to admire their handiwork. "Looks crooked," Luke said. "Looks real," Madison replied. Ellie twirled in the grass. "It looks like it belongs here," and that Madison thought was the whole point. That afternoon they set up a small picnic beneath the tree. Ellie arranged her dolls in a perfect row. Luke brought out sandwiches and too many napkins. Madison brought the last piece of her past that needed releasing, a folded letter she hadn't shown anyone. She'd written it to herself, to the soldier version of her, to the woman who thought courage was loud and lonely. You don't have to carry the burden alone to be brave. You just have to keep showing up even when you're tired, especially when you're tired. Luke noticed the letter in her hand. "Another one?" he asked. Madison smiled. "The last one." She tucked it beneath a stone by the treehouse base. A small ritual, a quiet goodbye. That evening, as twilight softened the sky, Luke pulled a small hand-carved plaque from his truck. Madison watched as he climbed up the treehouse ladder and nailed it above the entryway. When he came down, Ellie clapped. Madison leaned in to read the inscription. "Welcome home. No more rain, no more waiting. Just wood and nails and people choosing each other again and again." Back inside, Ellie fell asleep with a flashlight in hand and her favorite book open across her chest. Madison tucked the blanket around her shoulders. Luke stood in the doorway, arms crossed, his expression soft. "She loves you," he said quietly. Madison turned. "I love her." Luke took a step forward. "She's not the only one." The room seemed to hold its breath, and Madison, after all she had endured, didn't step back, didn't second guess. She simply whispered, "I know." They didn't kiss. Not yet. But something passed between them, firm, unspoken, and more real than anything that could be rushed. A promise not of perfection, but of presence. Of staying. That night, as the wind gently rustled through the trees, Madison lay awake beneath the same roof she once hesitated to enter. She stared at the ceiling, her fingers laced over her chest, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. She wasn't fighting anymore. Not for validation. Not for survival. Just for joy. For peace. For the kind of love that showed up in the rain and never left. And maybe, just maybe, that was the kind that stayed. The knock came just after breakfast. Not rushed, not timid. 3 firm taps on the door like someone who belonged there, even if they hadn't been there before. Madison looked up from her cup of tea still warm in her hands. Luke glanced toward the front door with a flicker of curiosity. Ellie was coloring at the kitchen table, humming softly to herself, oblivious. Luke opened the door. A sharply dressed woman in her early 40s stood on the porch. Her dark wool coat was still dusted with the last flakes of morning frost. Her clipboard was tucked against her chest, but it was the badge clipped to her lapel that caught Madison's attention. Veteran Advocacy and Outreach, National Office. "Luke Harrison," the woman asked, glancing past him to the living room. Yes, he said cautiously. She smiled. You were referred by Maria Torres and the local reintegration board. May I come in? Madison stood up instinctively. Luke stepped aside, motioning for her to enter. I'm Joanna Fields, the woman said, her voice crisp but not unkind. I'm part of the national initiative focused on expanding local veteran programs, particularly ones led by former service members like yourself. Luke nodded once, still unsure where this was headed. You came across our radar after submitting your testimony for Lieutenant Madison Greer, she continued, now turning toward Madison. And then again, when you accepted a support training role. We've been reviewing your background. Madison stepped closer, protective. Reviewing why, Joanna smiled, unshaken. Because we believe stories like yours, both of yours, can do more than help individuals. They can inspire reform, community action, even national dialogue. Luke's brow furrowed. I'm not a speaker. I'm not a poster child. Joanna nodded. That's exactly why we need you. Because you're real. Because you stopped when others didn't. Because you carry the story people need to hear. She pulled a sealed folder from her satchel and handed it to Luke. There's a summit in Washington next month, focused on rehumanizing the reintegration process. We'd like you to join the panel. Talk about what happens after the uniform comes off. We want your voice, your experience, your integrity. Luke opened the folder slowly. Inside was a formal invitation. Reimbursement for travel. A speaking itinerary. His name printed in bold. He exhaled. I'm a single dad. We have accommodations for families. You'd all be welcome. Joanna looked between them both. You don't have to decide now. Just consider what a room full of decision-makers could learn from someone who chose kindness over convenience. After she left, silence filled the space. Ellie broke it first. Does this mean we get to go to Washington like in my book report? Madison knelt beside her. Maybe. It's a big deal. Ellie grinned. I could draw a map for us. Luke sat heavily on the arm of the couch, invitation still open in his hands. I didn't ask for any of this. Madison sat beside him. Neither did I. But that didn't stop it from finding you. He looked at her. You think I should do it? She hesitated, not because she doubted his ability, but because she knew what he was really asking. Could he speak about what he'd buried? Could he stand in a room full of strangers and open the door to wounds long covered? You don't owe the world your story, she said gently. But if you're ready, if you want to use it to build something, then maybe this is the moment that story stops being about pain and starts being about purpose. Luke looked down at the folder again. I've spent years feeling like I didn't do enough, like kindness wasn't enough. Madison touched his hand. But it was. It is. You changed my life, Luke, that night in the rain. That wasn't small. That was everything. They talked about it over dinner. Madison, Luke, and Ellie, who was already suggesting they visit the Lincoln Memorial and some place that sells pancakes shaped like states. By nightfall, Luke had made his decision. Not with a speech, not with fanfare, but by quietly placing the folder on the kitchen table and beginning to fill out the acceptance form. The next few weeks moved quickly. Maria helped him prep with mock interviews and presentation tips. Madison rewrote parts of his old journal entries into outlines he could draw from. Ellie designed a tiny cardboard model of the Capitol building and insisted they practice his speech beside it. And through it all, something shifted between Luke and Madison, not rushed, not dramatic, but deeply rooted. They were no longer two people orbiting the same hurt. They were becoming partners in healing. The night before they left for Washington, Madison stepped onto the porch and found Luke leaning on the railing. His arms folded, his eyes searching the stars. Can I tell you something, he said. She joined him, nodding. That night, I picked you up. I almost didn't stop. She turned to him, surprised. I saw the uniform, the soaked bag, the look on your face, and I thought, she's just like me, and if I stop, I might have to feel something again. Madison waited, heart quiet. But I stopped, and I felt everything. And it was worth it. She reached for his hand. "I'm glad you did." They stood like that a long time, the night wrapped around them. Two people who had no intention of becoming heroes but had chosen decency when it mattered most. And now they were about to walk into a room that could echo that choice far beyond a rainy night on a lonely road. Because sometimes the knock that changes everything isn't the one on your door. It's the one you answered without expecting anything in return. And for Luke Harrison, that knock had already come. Now it was his turn to pass it forward. The stage lights were softer than Madison expected, more like a morning sun filtering through church windows than the sharp glare of a spotlight. Still, the large conference room hummed with quiet energy. Rows of listeners, veterans, counselors, lawmakers, students sat forward in their seats, eyes fixed on the man standing at the podium. Luke Harrison stood, steady hands resting lightly on the edges of the lectern. He wasn't wearing a suit. Just a simple button-down shirt, the sleeves rolled to his elbows, his boots scuffed but clean. He looked like what he was, a man who'd been through it and didn't need polish to prove he mattered. Madison sat near the front, Ellie on her lap, the child unusually still. She gripped her father's dog tags in one hand, twirling them absent-mindedly as if they were a talisman. Luke cleared his throat. The microphone caught even the smallest shift in his breath. Then he began. "I never imagined I'd be here," he said. "I'm not a general, not a politician, not a decorated hero. I'm just a single dad from a small town who once forgot he had something to offer." A hush settled across the room. There was a time I thought my story ended with regret. I thought the best thing I could do for the world was stay quiet, stay small, stay out of the way. I was wrong. He paused, glancing at Madison. She gave him a quiet nod, her chest tight. Because then one night in the rain I saw someone who looked like I felt, someone carrying things the world couldn't see. And I stopped. Just that. I stopped. He looked down at the lectern, his voice thickening. And that choice, it didn't just help her, it saved me too. He straightened, hands steady again. We talk a lot about serving, about sacrifice. But I've learned something in the years since I took off. The uniform service doesn't end when you come home. Sometimes it begins again, in quieter ways, with one act of kindness. One person choosing not to walk away. A ripple of stillness spread through the room. Some blinked back tears. Others simply sat with faces turned inward as if remembering their own moment, someone who stayed. Someone who saw them. Luke continued, "You don't have to fix everything. You just have to show up. For your neighbor, your daughter, a stranger on the side of the road. Because the most lasting change doesn't happen in policy, it happens in presence." And then he ended with words that no one in the audience would forget. "I didn't write a speech. I just wrote a letter once. And that letter came back to me not on paper but in the way someone chose to stay in my life. And in that staying, I found my place again." The standing ovation was slow to rise, but it rose. Not out of politeness, out of truth. Madison stood, tears in her eyes, Ellie clapping fiercely beside her. When Luke stepped off the stage, Madison met him halfway. She said nothing at first, only reached up and pulled him into a hug. A full, grounding, steady hug. "You did it," she whispered. He pulled back just enough to rest his forehead against hers. "No," he said. "We did." Later that evening, back in the small hotel room, Ellie fell asleep clutching her favorite stuffed animal and wearing a lanyard with her VIP youth guest badge proudly displayed. Luke and Madison sat on the balcony watching the city lights flicker beneath a soft navy sky. Neither of them spoke for a while. The silence was full, not empty. Finally, Madison reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. A fresh one, handwritten. Luke looked at it surprised. Another letter. She smiled. The last one. "This time, I'm sending it." "To who?" She turned the envelope so he could read the name. to any soldier who thinks the battle is over when the war ends. Luke blinked. Where's it going? Maria's putting together a welcome package for veterans re-entering civilian life. This'll be part of it. She exhaled. They'll get a letter from someone who survived the silence. Someone who still believes that the rain doesn't mean the journey ends. It just makes the next step harder and more worth it. Luke reached for her hand. Their fingers twined together like it had always been meant that way. I'm proud of you, he said. I'm proud of us, she replied. Back home a week later, the treehouse stood taller somehow, even though no one had touched it since they left. Maybe it was the new coat of paint Ellie had begged for. Or maybe, just maybe, it stood taller because of what had been built around it. Trust, second chances, and a kind of love that wasn't rushed but earned. Madison walked into the backyard alone that afternoon and tucked another folded note beneath the plaque Luke had carved. It wasn't signed. It didn't have to be. Dear whoever you are, I hope someone stops for you. I hope someone holds the door, brings the coffee, keeps the light on. Because you matter, even when the world forgets. And when the rain comes, and it will, I hope you remember this. The people who stay. The ones who see you. They are the miracle. The rain had come, but it was no longer where her story ended. It was where it began. We'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? And what part of this story resonated most with you?